Recording on. There we go. This session is being recorded by the City of St. Albert and is intended to be shared and posted on the city's websites or through social media platforms. In addition, the city will retain this recording for internal retention purposes related to administering the city's public participation events. The personal information collected during this session is protected by the provisions of the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act. I am joined today by my colleagues, Amanda Wild, a little wave, Recreation Parks, Wade Benfeld, Recreation and Parks, Melissa Logan, Health, Safety and Environment, and I think your video's off, but Diane Anger, Director of Recreation and Parks. There she is. We respectfully acknowledge that we were on Treaty 6 territory, traditional lands of First Nations and Métis peoples. As treaty people, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, we share the responsibility for stewardship of this beautiful land. In addition to the feedback gathered today, we also invite you to take some time to review the project website. There you can find different ways to learn more, provide your feedback, and ask questions. For this evening, you will initially be provided with a presentation. Please feel free to ask questions as they occur to you throughout the presentation by using the chat function. I will direct your questions to the appropriate staff member and we will provide a response once the presentation is complete. We plan to leave as much time for questions at the end as possible. However, we will close the event at 8 p.m. to respect everyone's time. I will now turn the presentation over to Amanda, as I am sure she is anxious to provide you with some great information about the Parks Bylaw and what is being proposed for changes. Take it away, Amanda. Amanda, sorry. There we go.
That's all right. Good evening, everyone. As Anna said, my name is Amanda Wild and I'm the Senior Project Manager for Parks Development. I'm delighted to be here today to share with you some ideas around how the city could revise the Parks Bylaw. I would encourage everyone to make yourself comfortable, get a drink. I will share I have 2 children and 2 dogs at home. So if you have similar circumstances, do not worry about background noise or anything like that. We do ask that during the presentation you keep muted and turn your videos off. If you're able to turn that on and off on your own. Just keep those off for now. As Anna said, we would encourage you to submit questions throughout the presentation using the chat function, and we'll collect all of those kind of in the background. Once we are finished the presentation, if you're more comfortable asking verbally, we will unmute your mics and allow your videos to start if you choose. So feel free to interact with us in whatever way makes you the most comfortable, but we will be collecting all that information as we go through all the questions. As well, if you do have any technical issues, you can't hear anything, please do just use the chat function. I'm just going to share my screen here and get going. And I'm just going to ask Anna to give me a quick heads up if she can see what she's supposed to be seeing.
I can see it.
Thank you. So just a little bit about why we're here today and hopefully why you're here today. To start off with, it really should be noted that the park system in St. Albert is well managed, it's valued by our residents, and it's generally respected by our park users. The city is not proposing to change the Parks Bylaw to address a whole host of issues or known concerns. Instead, it is our intent to ensure that there's the right policy and the right enforcement tools in place to manage the city's park system for the coming decades and as the city continues to grow. So a lot of this is maybe questioning why now. Our regular bylaw review is required by our council policy every 4 years. It's precisely because our park system is so well managed in St. Albert. There's been lots of attempts at revising the bylaw over the years, where it just hasn't been a priority. That being said, most of St. Albert's bylaws have changed substantially since the Parks Bylaw was initially introduced, including ones such as the Animal Bylaw and the Smoking Bylaw that have both direct and indirect impacts to park spaces. So this project started prior to COVID, and through COVID and the increasing use of the city's parks and trails, it's become even more apparent that it's important to keep city policies and bylaw up to date. Our new large-scale growth plans, including the municipal development plan and plans for annexation, have also highlighted the need to modernize the bylaw to keep pace with the growth and changes within the city. So a little bit about what the Parks Bylaw is to do. The Parks Bylaw is intended to manage public behavior in parks so that people feel safe, they feel comfortable, and they feel welcome in public spaces. This includes the behavior of individuals, as well as groups, businesses, and other organizations. The proposed bylaw provides clarity to certain groups of users, including event holders and businesses, while remaining flexible to adapt to new trends, changing user demographics, or emergent needs. The proposals contained in the draft Parks Bylaw shared with you through our website are proposals for public conversation. The revisions represent over 2 years of cross-jurisdictional research, internal scans of issues, assessments of inconsistencies and needs, but they are in no way final. In order to provide the best recommendation to Council, we are engaging on the draft with the intent to adjust the proposed bylaw as needed once we better understand the community's perspective on St. Albert's parks and open space system. There are a few things that the Parks Bylaw will not do. Because it's intended to look at how the public interacts with the park system, it does not direct how the city plans, operates, or patrols our park system. It does not direct what city service levels are provided, nor does it decide what programming are to be provided. The bylaw as proposed does not direct the type of amenities included or how parks are to be constructed. It also does not direct how the parks bylaw is to be enforced, including operational decisions like patrol frequency, what type of peace officer might respond to a particular complaint, or the method of patrol or response. So over the next few slides, I'll go through a little bit of where we are now in our current bylaw and where we're proposing to go into the new bylaw. So the most important part of any bylaw, I believe, is the scope. So understanding where and when a bylaw applies and when it doesn't provides clarity to the public as well as our enforcement officers. The geographic scope changes proposed enable a few different things. The first is we've added general enjoyment, and that's to provide clarity for those areas that don't have clearly structured recreation opportunities. So that don't have playgrounds or rinks or things that clearly identify them as parks, but are still used by the public for things like wildlife viewing, photography, or other more hard to define leisure activities. We've removed the designation of natural areas park, not to change the way that natural areas are managed in the city, but because natural area is not a designation used in any of the city's bylaws or land use designation systems, so it doesn't carry a lot of meaning in the city context. We've removed boulevards from the definition, and that's simply so that all boulevards in the city are treated under the traffic bylaw and they're all the same. We've added conservation reserve as a new tool that was created by the Municipal Government Act, which allows the city to purchase or otherwise acquire lands for conservation purposes. We haven't used that tool as the city, but there is hope that we will use that tool in the future. So we wanted to make sure that those areas would be covered under this bylaw. It also allows the CAO to designate other lands as needed. For example, a lot of people would assume that the green space outside of Service Place is a park. It's actually not under the land use bylaw. It's an institutional zoning, which means the parks bylaw doesn't necessarily apply. So we wanted the ability for the CAO to clarify some of those odds and sods that exist within our land system in St. Albert. So next I'm going to go through a series of what I call buckets of work or areas of investigation that the project team has gone through as we've looked at revising this bylaw. So the first is alcohol consumption in parks. Allowing individual liquor consumption in parks is a new area for the city of St. Albert. The direction to pursue this as a pilot was first prompted by provincial direction on the allowance of alcohol use in day use areas in provincial parks in 2019, with a recommendation from the then Minister of Municipal Affairs that municipalities also considering allowing this type of use. St. Albert ran an alcohol in parks pilot program in Lyons, Rotary, and Kingswood parks from September 1st to October 31st of this year. It's a very short period of time and kind of an odd time of year, but we wanted to gather some data prior to this engagement and allow some opportunity this year. Our public feedback from that pilot was quite limited. We had 28 respondents to our survey online, over half of which supported the pilot generally, 18 of which supported a permanent alcohol in parks program, and 9 were opposed to any alcohol in parks. We did also track all municipal enforcement services and public operations complaints. There were only 1 complaint received related to a large quantity of bottles and cans left behind at one site. We had no enforcement actions, including warnings or tickets issued. So the scope of permitting alcohol consumption in parks is limited by the Gaming, Liquor, and Cannabis Act, which is a provincial legislation legislative piece, which states that consumption of alcohol may be allowed in parks as permitted by the owner or operator of the park within designated picnic areas only. The park owner or operator must put a sign in place indicating the allowable hours of use and delineate the boundaries of permitted use. We do know that this subject tends to be a value-based conversation. There are undeniable societal and personal impacts from alcohol abuse. And while responsible consumption can be seen as a positive by many, there are demonstrated negative trends in Alberta, including the increasing use of alcohol by youth and increasing hospitalizations caused by alcohol-related illnesses, as shared by the Alberta Health Services. While the recommendation in this version of the proposed bylaw is to continue with a permanent program, the project team is really hoping for those robust community conversations and ideas to inform the ultimate recommendations to council. The next area of work that we looked at was encroachment. So the city has identified an issue with a variety of encroachments within parks and environmental areas, particularly in our ravine areas. People build play structures, they build fences and sheds, retaining walls, gardens, and other structures on city property, mostly because they don't know where the property line is. While the city has clear rights to not allow members of the public to encroach in park spaces and take over park spaces for their private use, in practice, the city has limited enforcement tools to manage non-compliant landowners. So this proposal aligns encroachment bylaw provisions to the approved council policy passed earlier in 2021 and outlines the enforcement penalties for refusing to remove the encroachment. It does maintain the existing city ability to civilly recover damages and costs involved in removing the encroachment should the city need to act. The city typically would act in areas of public safety as the priority there. This bylaw is intended to only be used where resolution with homeowners under the council policy process can't be achieved. So it's really looking at it as a last resort if the city and the homeowner can't come to an agreement on how to deal with the encroachment. So another area of change is environmental protection. While St. Albert is renowned for its care and appreciation for its green spaces, there are significant gaps in the Parks bylaw when it comes to environmental protection. Through this proposal, we've assessed the city's needs and relative strength of our bylaw compared to others across the region. By providing more clarity and setting more transparent expectations around protecting and preserving both natural and maintained green spaces, we hope to make a clear statement that environmental protection of parks, open spaces, and the wildlife those spaces protect is of high importance to the city. It is good to note that the provisions do not apply to those residents acting with city permission. This enables the continued operation of things like the Partners in Parks program, our naturalization program, and other initiatives that promote stewardship of the city's park system, as well as continued operation for community partners on leased lands. Protection of city trees in that same environmental protection area has been a major focus for our project team, with St. Albert again this year being proclaimed a tree city of the world. City trees are deliberately removed throughout the parks and open spaces system without permission and usually for personal reasons. These trees provide invaluable ecosystem benefits, can be worth in the tens to hundreds of thousands of dollars, and be essentially irreplaceable once they reach a certain maturity. A stronger fine for tree loss is proposed, increasing from the current fine of $100 to $500 to provide a stronger deterrence. This is not a cost recovery method, it's simply to act as a deterrent to those who might act inappropriately. This increased fine could be in addition to any civil action the city might choose to take. So activities in parks is kind of a really broad bucket and speaks to a lot of different things. The existing parks bylaw speaks to very specific activities like golf or walking on grass where you shouldn't, those kinds of things. While our proposed wording retains much of the same restrictions, it broadens the restrictions to any behavior that may be likely to cause harm or damage to persons or property. So things like using infrastructure as it's not intended, climbing to the roof structures of playgrounds or doing those type of activities. So this proposal closely mirrors other bylaws in our region and is aligned to the protection of persons and property bylaw. In addition, the specific provisions of the proposal, this draft bylaw adds the ability of the CAO to make and post enforceable rules around specific activities in parks. These rules may be broad, for example, permission to use portable barbecues and propane fire pits in parks, or specific, like no ice fishing at Lacombe Lake Park, as it makes the ice unstable and unsafe for skating. So this provision is intended to give significant flexibility to manage site-specific or emerging issues without requiring a council motion to achieve. This proposal also slightly modifies existing prohibitions around golf and archery. While these activities continue to be restricted due to the danger of projectiles going out of sight, the proposal does add the ability for areas to be designated for these activities in the future, should there be demand and available land. Additional activities that the city is considering restricting are related to stormwater management facilities. The city has had many concerns with people recreating in and around stormwater management facilities and is considering restricting recreation that is ice or water related, including things like swimming, boating, or skating. Stormwater management facilities are present to manage stormwater. So that includes water flows from melts, from floods, and intense rain events. Because these waters contain a high volume of sediment and debris, then they may have water flow at any time of the year. The water is really unclean and does not consistently freeze, making them unsafe for recreation. The proposal makes flying drones within parks prohibited as well, unless adhering to federal guidelines and with city permission. Although that doesn't actually change the way that people are allowed to use drones in the city of St. Albert, adding this provision in the bylaw allows bylaw officers to enforce the appropriate use of drones, which can currently only be done by the RCMP in St. Albert. And drone use infractions are not normally a high priority call for our RCMP partners. So this would just allow the bylaw officers to go out and enforce as well. Certain activities that remain relevant and are proposed to remain within the bylaw are restrictions, including the use of fireworks or other incendiary devices, as well as restrictions around setting fires, except in provided fire pits. Again, with all of these activities and parks proposals, they are modifiable with city permission. So the next area is events. Our current bylaw has no provisions. We do have a council policy that requires permission for events to be held in parks, but it is not enforceable. So the city has approximately 90 events held in a normal year, obviously not in the last couple of years, unfortunately. And it is really good to note that there are no unmanageable issues with the events held in city parks. Our partners do a really good job. They're well managed, and we don't have a lot of conflict there. Because the city policy is not directly enforceable and does not set rules for events backwards, the proposed bylaw looks to define events that need permission, requires permission to be granted before an event is held, and allows the city to establish enforceable rules and regulations through the CAO to be posted on the city's website through an application process. So really this provision is around defining what an event is, clarifying when you need permission, and setting that process in place a little bit more firmly than it is now. And it really is related to the continued growth of the city, and with the 90 events held in the city in any given year, a large majority of those are held outdoors in our park system. So just doing a little bit of future proofing for us. The last kind of bucket of work in this area of activities and parks is around businesses. Our current practice discourages most temporary or mobile operators to operate within our park spaces due to a lack of clear policy. The city views enabling commercial vendor opportunities that are compatible with the overall use of the park space, are not in direct competition to our existing approved vendors like our concessions like we have at Woodlands, and that don't interfere with the intended use of the park as a positive step. There have also been concerns with certain vendors not receiving correct permits and causing damage to city property. The clearer policy and process would support preventing. So supported by a new administrative process, this provision would be intended to catch those who need to take up space within the park. So those who are setting up tents and parking stalls and tables, and where there is an intention to sell, gift, or promote goods or services. It is not intended to change the process for businesses that use the park spaces as they are intended and do not interfere with public use of the spaces. Example of these type of businesses would be dog walkers at Lacombe Lake Park or fitness classes that are held in the sports fields that don't displace the general public. And kind of the last area of work is enforcement. Our current bylaw has a flat fine structure of $100 for any offense that may be ticketed under the bylaw. Our revision really looked at where our fines were relative to other bylaws in the city, where our fines were relative to our regional partners, as well as where the fines were at compared to the risk of the activity. So as an example, littering in the parks bylaw was a flat $100 fine. However, if you littered in any other public space in the city, it was a $120 fine. So we wanted to bring those fines more in alignment with each other, as well as apply that risk-based approach to some of those more riskier activities that we would like to deter. So that was a lot of information. We'll get to questions right away, but just to give you a sense of next steps in case you need to drop out before the end of our session tonight. Our internal review has been ongoing. As I mentioned, we started prior to COVID, so we're about 2.5 years into this project. We are now in our public engagement phase. We've already met with the Chamber of Commerce, some of our community leaseholders, the Environmental Advisory Committee, as well as the Community Services Advisory Committee. And happy to be talking to you this evening. We will be running our public survey until December 10th through our project website at conversation.stalbert.ca. And we have a lot of different ways you can interact with us, from quick polls to asking the project team directly questions, to filling out a survey, to providing your own ideas on the bylaw. So there's quite a number of ways you can interact with us through that website. From this public engagement, we will be collating all of the feedback that we receive into a What We Heard report. We do intend that to be available on the Conversation website by the first week of January. Just take us a couple of weeks to compile all that information and get that back out to you. From there, we will be revising the Parks Bylaw draft into something that we'd like to present to Council. An important piece of that work will be an implementation plan. So looking at the proposal that we're going to bring forward to Council, what are those things within the city's internal structure that needs to change, new signs, new processes, web pages, updates, all those kind of things. We anticipate that to occur through January through March, sorry. From there, we will be preparing a report and a presentation to Council, where public will have another opportunity to engage directly with Council, give your thoughts. If you're not satisfied with where the bylaw ended up, or if you're really in support of the revisions that we've put forward to Council, both are welcome to speak to Council. We do hope to have the first reading in front of Council for late March or early April of 2022. So at this time, I'm going to pause and hand it back to Anna for questions. We will also invite you at this time, if you would like to unmute your mic. There is a raise hand function within the bottom toolbar within Zoom. So if you can use that, that would be great. And I will hand it off to Anna.
Excellent. Thank you, Amanda. That was great. Lots of good information there. So as Amanda said, if we don't have any questions yet in our chat, but if someone does have a question and would like to unmute or possibly raise their hand, that would be great. We're anxious to answer any questions you may have. And I'll probably start. One thing that I was wondering, is there any information presented tonight that surprised you? Something maybe you didn't realize was happening and that has required some revisions to the Parks Bylaw? Oh, everybody was happy. Mike, yes, please go ahead, Mike. We'll just, we got to unmute you.
I can't unmute myself.
Oh,
okay,
there you go.
Yeah, Mike Dickinson here from the St. Albert Community Garden Association. We are an environmental reserve, and I'm wondering, I'm the past vice president and acting president, and unfortunately our executive could not attend tonight. But the one question that has come up is the fact that we are included, it seems the same as a park, but as you're probably aware, we are using the floodplain land by bylaw 9/2016. So we have a whole number of agreements with the city of St. Albert that are quite different than the Parks Bylaw. And I'm wondering, is that something that's going to change? Now, the agreement was actually to be renewed. The bylaw was to be renewed, but council decided no, there was no need for that. And we still haven't got an official agreement. It's still before legal. Legal are actually, I don't know. I don't know what they're doing. They unfortunately, I guess, have a number of bigger fish to fry, And so they're not really getting back to a lowly little nonprofit organization such as the community garden. I guess we're not sure, because we have things like we have 2 sheds on the property, we compost, we mow the lawn, we trim the trees, we keep the area in, we do everything. Like we keep the area in a very presentable form. So when the public come through, it actually looks quite nice, because they come through to look at the gardens, the garden plots that are there. I
Excellent.
guess the question is our status, and we think it would be nice if there was a clause within the new bylaw that might indicate that there are some areas that are exempted. The one area that is of concern is that should we actually be putting a sign up in relation to alcohol use? Because certainly we have been very clear that this is not an alcohol use area. And we've made that clear to our members, but also to visitors, because we've actually had both that have tried consuming alcohol on that land. And we don't want, it's very much a family setting, and we really don't want to encourage the use of alcohol. And also smoking, I guess, is the other thing too. Yeah. So, okay.
Thanks, Mike. There's lots of things in there to comment on, and I will provide one comment. And if you do have a lease agreement with the city, then that will cover some of the things that you have spoke about, although I know you said it still seems to be in the works right now. I'll pass it on to Amanda to maybe respond to a few of the other items that you did bring up.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mike. Hopefully I'm going to touch on all your points, but please interrupt me if I miss or clarify anything. In terms of your inclusion in the Parks Bylaw, I think a lot of people don't know that the Parks Bylaw has always included the environmental reserve. So that's actually not a change. It's just, this is a much more extensive bylaw for sure. The Parks Bylaw is intended to catch every space owned or maintained by the city that is used for general enjoyment or recreation. So the status of the community gardens land within the park system within St. Albert hasn't changed and isn't changing under this proposal for sure. As Anna said, the intention with our leaseholders is to ensure over time, it will take time, as you've noted, sometimes our legal services does take a while, to update the leases. In fact, the leases are really the reason that there are clauses basically above every prohibition that says, unless acting as a city employee or with city permission. And that's so we can enable our leaseholders to operate as you've been operating and within the needs that you have specific to your activity, while still having more global rules around that way that the space needs to be used by the general public. So over time, we will be updating the leases once we have the approved bylaw and council's endorsed that, to make sure that you know, those things that are of concern to you or where you may need a change from what the Parks Bylaw, the new bylaw says, that's explicitly captured in your lease, so that you have that explicit city permission that you'd need, and you wouldn't have to come to the city every time. It would just be right within your lease. So in terms of the alcohol in parks, the intention at this time is not to designate all park spaces. It is a requirement under the Provincial Act that the space be specifically designated. It has to be within a picnic area. It has to be approved by the owner or operator of the site. As the operator of the site, the community gardens could approach the city and say, hey, we'd like to allow it, or no, absolutely not. And both of those would be completely acceptable under the provincial rules. So we would work with the public to make sure that they understand that it is, if it were to go forward, it would be at designated sites, as signed with city permission within an allowable area in alignment to the provincial legislation that we need to follow. So it's certainly not the intention that you can walk into a park and have a drink. It has to be very closely regulated, and our operators will be given that choice where there is an operator on the space. Did I catch everything for you, Mike?
Let's see. So I'm wondering, the other thing that I thought about, are there other areas that, and maybe that should be spelled out somewhere, that there are other areas that are designated as environmental reserves? For instance, is the Botanic Park an environmental reserve?
I would have to double check where the floodplain is. Essentially, the entire Red Willow Park system is floodplain.
Okay.
But we do have mapping through the land use bylaw. So there we do have, and we can certainly share on our project website where those areas are. But that's all established through land use bylaw for sure. And like I said, pretty much every park within the Red Willow system would be within the floodplain.
So I expect that they would probably have a lease with the city as well. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Okay, that's good for now. Thank you.
Anna, you need to unmute.
Thank you. Here I'm thinking I'm always unmuted. The question was in regards to events and whether or not events would be, just pulling up my question again, clearer defined and clarified as far as what would be considered events being held in parks.
Yeah, absolutely. I can speak to that a little bit. We do have a new definition proposed for event. And I'll just read it off for those that don't have the bylaw just handy with them tonight. Event means a gathering of people within a park that has a predetermined set date and time and requires one or more of the following: exclusive use of any area of a park, including parking areas, open space, park amenities, or the erection or use of a mobile or temporary structure, including or but not limited to food trucks or other vehicles, tents, trailers, canopies, stages, or signage, or if there is liquor service involved, or exemptions to other city bylaws. So a really common one there is noise bylaw or fireworks, or road closures or other impediments to traffic flow. So that's our proposed definition. I think at this point we are looking for clarity from our partners and from residents if that is clear enough, or if there is more detail or more information or less detail or information. That's the kind of feedback that we're looking at to see if we've got the definition right and if people can follow it and understand clearly if what they want to do is an event or not. So if we've missed the mark or not, that's the kind of feedback that we're looking for.
Great, thanks, Amanda. Another one probably for you. Can you elaborate on the proposed definitions of event and business? So you've elaborated on event and then as well as far as business. And I'm assuming this is businesses being held that are doing their activity within the park.
Perfect. Yeah. So the definition of business that we've pulled is within our business licensing bylaw. So we've just copied that. Again, reading from the proposed draft is business means any business, occupation, activity, amusement, entertainment, trade, employment, profession, or calling, and the provision of a service of any kind that is conducted for the purpose of earning income, whether or not is conducted for the purpose of earning a profit. So the whole idea that is if you're doing any kind of what would publicly be understood as business, whether for profit or not for profit, you would be considered a business. And then further down in section 310, to further kind of clarify for businesses specifically looking to operate within a park space, we've proposed that businesses require city permission where they need exclusive use of any area of a park. So again, that same idea of parking areas, open space, the park amenities, whatever may be required for their own use. The erection of mobile or temporary structures, food trucks, vehicles, tents, trailers, canopies, stages, or signage. And then selling, providing, or advertising of goods or services for sale, promotion, or gift. So that whole idea of you need to take up space in the park, you need to erect something, be it a sign, a tent trailer, or whatever. And the intention of your activity is to sell, advertise, or give away for the purpose of business, whether that's for profit or not. So again, that's a definition that the city has used for business. Those are the provisions that we're proposing. But again, we're looking for the clarity, and really the intention around the business is because there isn't clarity the city will often default to saying no because we're not really clear if it's appropriate. So this is intended to clarify that. If it's not clarifying things for you or you still have a lot of questions about it, that's really good feedback for us so that we can continue to refine that definition and those provisions.
Excellent. Thanks, Manda. Another question. All parks are supposed to be a family setting, not just the St. Albert garden plots, as Mike Dickinson had earlier explained. Has this been considered in allowing drinking in these spaces? And then there's a second part of that. What is the benefit to the city of allowing consumption of alcohol in our parks? So Manda, I'm turning that, yeah.
Yeah, I might ask Wade if he has any follow-up to this one, as he supported some of that work as well. So in terms of the consideration of a family, that is certainly some of the feedback that we heard to date. Again, it's been pretty limited. And there are definitely, like I said, divisive views on alcohol. So what we're really trying to do is get a sense of how the community feels about that. It's not something administratively we have a strong position on either way. I believe I can speak for our project team when we say there are benefits. You can hear people talk about kind of a more permissive attitude towards alcohol can be seen as something that treats it less as a forbidden fruit for certain populations and more of a norm, which can reduce some of the harmful impacts, or it can go the other way and just exacerbate an existing societal issue depending on your perspective. So I will say that's certainly feedback that we've heard, and it is feedback that we are seeking and gathering through these conversations, and that there have been no decisions made in terms of whether alcohol in parks should be a kind of a permanent program within the city of St. Albert. But we are looking for that feedback through this process to kind of put that question forward to council.
Great, thank you, Amanda. Next question. Again, this does have to do with the alcohol conversation. The 25 meter around the designated tables for alcohol use at Lions Park. Why 25 meters? Could it be less than the 80 feet? And Amanda, I'll probably send this back to you again.
Yeah, and I can certainly give some history on kind of where that 25 meters came from. As a administration, we had a fairly short period of time to put the pilot program together. So we kind of had to reach out to our regional partners who are running similar pilots and do some research. But without a lot of, there's not a lot of municipalities that have dived too deeply into this area as of yet. The 25 meters, quite honestly, came from the cluster of picnic tables in Lions Park, and looking at that and understanding that those that want to participate may want to enjoy the large fire pit. So honestly, it was, we can't have something that is sitting at the table and nothing else from an enforcement perspective. So we felt we needed an area of allowable consumption. And so that's kind of where that 25 meter came from. Different cities have done it different ways. The city of Calgary requires that you be seated at the picnic table to consume alcohol. You have to be right there. There's no buffer at all. The city of Edmonton doesn't define a buffer, but you can kind of loosely move around these designated picnic areas that they've mapped out. Morinville piloted 2 entire park sites. So the entirety of the park was a designated picnic area. And the Strathcona County, who is the last city that has run a pilot on this, chose picnic shelters to make the areas quite definable. Where they didn't have a picnic shelter, they created a small cluster. They brought in extra picnic tables or used a cluster of picnic tables. So there are certainly lots of ways to define what a designated picnic area is. 25 meters was just exactly that, a pilot based on what we had and what we thought people might want to, how people might want to experience Lions Park in particular. But there's no science to it, and it certainly can be modified.
Excellent. Thanks, Amanda. I'm going to give you a bit of a break. I have a question here for Wade. The advertising for this meeting came through the Chamber of Commerce for us. They are a service club, the St. Albert Host Lions. Might many of the service clubs have missed this meeting and the polls?
That's a good question. Thanks for asking that. To start off, I'm glad that you saw it through the chamber notification. I think that actually probably worked really well for some people. Communication for this open house actually went out through a bunch of different channels. It went out through email to our chamber partners, to our community groups and our sport groups and many other community partners, and some businesses we even, or some vendors that we do business with through the city. And it's been on our website for a couple of weeks, and including this event is on our event calendar, and it was communicated through the social media accounts. So we've had actually pretty good engagement and pretty good uptake from communicating and advertising that message. And fortunately, we still have the Cultivate the Conversation page, which will have the online survey that will be live until December 10th, and that's at conversation.sanealbert.ca. And once we go through this information and have a chance to kind of summarize these questions and answers, we'll post a lot of this information on that same page as well. So thanks for asking. That was really good.
Excellent. Thank you, Wade. I'm going to go to Mike Dickinson. You have your hand up and I'll let you ask a question. I'll take you off. Oh, and now I've got to unmute you. Sorry, Amanda, are you able to unmute?
There we go.
There we go. Oh, we had you. Oh, there you go. Okay.
There we go. Okay. Yeah, it's in regards to the alcohol in Lions Park. And it must have been a nightmare to police that situation. The issue during the summer or during the warmer time periods was that that parking lot was overflowing with vehicles. And I guess if people were walking there, it would be okay. And somewhere, and I'd be darned if I can remember where, this came up on some chat group or some city site. And the idea was that in Europe, there are a number of parks where drinking is allowed. And certainly because of population density, people walk to their parks and as opposed to driving. So my concern is that with Lions Park, with that many people driving to the park, and I don't have any idea or any sense at all, but how many of those people were actually drinking alcohol and what was their blood alcohol level when they left the park? And I guess that would be a concern. It's almost encouraging people to bring your alcohol with you and drink here. And I don't know, I know in campgrounds, you just don't go and drink. Like you have a tent set up and the idea is you have a residence and that you actually are going to have alcohol with your food or with your meal, or sit around the fire and then nobody drives anywhere afterwards because you're camping right there. So I'm thinking that that is something that, I don't know whether that was considered when this so suddenly came up, that alcohol, and it was very sudden, that alcohol was going to be allowed in some of our city parks. I don't know how much discussion there was held even ahead of time. It seemed almost immediate that this was announced. Okay, here's what it's going to be, folks. We're going to allow drinking in certain parks in some locations. So I guess that's certainly my concern. Is the drinking and driving that I'm concerned about. Like if people were all walking there, fine, but when the parking lot is overflowing, you kind of wonder. I suspect whether that's actually the best move. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Mike. Lots of good points to certainly give us thought for the whole conversation around alcohol in the parks. And as Amanda said earlier, it's still something that we are certainly gathering information, whether it's through our various engagements with the parks bylaw. And again, if you're able to add any additional comments, if you can go to the Cultivate the Conversation site on the parks bylaw, we certainly would appreciate that. I'm not sure, Amanda, do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, other than to thank you, Mike, for adding and contributing to the conversation. This is kind of exactly what we were hoping for on this subject. I will say that the concern about drinking and driving is certainly real. It is in all of the municipalities that ran pilots, and Calgary's in their second year. I believe Edmonton is as well. It hasn't been, thankfully, an issue, but it certainly doesn't remove the potential for it being an issue. And the messaging around any kind of program would be responsible consumption. We're not promoting in any way people coming in and, having a wild party and doing those kind of things. That's not the intention there, but people do take it too far. And we certainly acknowledge that. So again, just thank you, Mike, for bringing your concerns forward, and we'll definitely be considering your points you made tonight.
Thanks, Amanda. I'll move on to the next, I guess, question comment. And Melissa, I'm going to direct this one towards you, so you might want to unmute. The comment is, I think in the future, any tree planting blitzes along the river should be strictly evergreen trees. It's a waste of time and money to be feeding beavers. They don't appear to enjoy coniferous trees, but love those tasty young deciduous trees. Gotta love our beavers.
We do. Rita, so yeah, we do have a healthy population of beavers here in the city, and we do monitor and maintain a sustainable population, and that's for a good reason. They are actually a very important species in our river system, and we probably would have a far less healthy Sturgeon River without them. So we do need to keep them in our river system. And we can only plant trees that will grow in appropriate areas. So in riverside, riparian type areas, coniferous trees may not necessarily be the tree of choice for planting. So we do have a naturalization coordinator who buys species that are specifically meant for whatever area he is planting. He has an extensive wealth of knowledge when it comes to naturalization and planting. So we plant what species are appropriate in what areas that we need. And we do have an active tree protection program where we do put cages up around the coniferous trees that we want to protect. And we do sacrifice a few for the beavers to keep them happy and healthy. So I hope that answers your comment there. If you have any other questions about our beaver management guidelines or how else we manage the beavers within the city, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Melissa. Another question, I'm not sure this may be to you again, Melissa. Would these changes address park maintenance regarding public works removing / planting of trees? Just thinking of the need for tree replacement requirements. So I'm not sure. Melissa, I'll take that one.
I think that's more Amanda. I don't.
Amanda, okay.
Parks bylaw has more to do with residents' activities, not to do with public works.
Great. Good, thanks, Amanda. Anything to add to that?
No, Melissa, you're absolutely
She's
correct.
got it. Okay.
The parks bylaw, that's the reason you'll see the words acting as city employees throughout the parks bylaw, is to make it really clear that when we go out and do these things, plant trees, remove trees, work with our partners and parks partners and our tree planting programs, that's all completely kosher under the bylaw. So that's why you'll see that wording throughout the bylaw. The bylaw doesn't direct how and when we do that. That's through administrative policies and programs and that kind of thing now.
Great, thank you. Next question, what was the cost associated with the pilot program? And I'll read the whole question, and I'll maybe just ask for clarification. I believe this is related to the alcohol in the parks. So what was the cost associated with the pilot program? I feel this money could have been spent much more wisely. And also going forward with all of the proposed cuts to the budget for 2022, there should be no further tax dollars wasted on this. And I just, I would expect this is about the alcohol pilot project. I don't want to, and that individual, I don't see if he's still here. That was Curtis.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think that's what he's referring to.
Yeah, okay,
Wade,
yeah.
do you mind speaking to that?
Yeah, I can definitely speak to some of the costs. I don't have the invoices in front of me, but the costs were mostly associated to developing and producing some outdoor signage that would last in the elements throughout the pilot project. And those signs were 6 or 8 inches by 8 inches, printed locally, and were installed by our public works teams on the picnic tables and then removed when the pilot project was done. So I know that any money spent is important, to make sure that it's going to a worthwhile cause. And this followed kind of the goals of the project, is to inform anyone who's visiting that table that they were part of the project and that they were allowed to consume responsibly within that area. And I can definitely follow up and get those costs, but they were maybe in the $100 or $200s, and that would have been for everything. That would have been for production and costs related to taxes and all that kind of stuff. So minimal, I think, on an overall project scale.
Good.
Yeah, thank you, Wade.
Thanks,
And
Wade.
in terms of going forward with the recommendation, the idea would be to look at if we were to implement a permanent program, if that's what the public feedback we received was, not presupposing. Part of the presentation to council would be those actions, that signage that would need to be put in place under the provincial regulations, and some kind of approximate cost of what it would take, so that council is fully informed before they make a decision on that, both on the policy side and on the cost side.
Excellent. Thanks, Amanda. There are a few more comments in the chat, more related to opinion on drinking within the parks. Are there any questions that are specifically related to the parks bylaw, and not to take away from the comments, but we are looking for if there are any questions related to the parks bylaw. I do see one comment from Barb, glad the can and bottle recycle containers will be provided more than they have now in Lions Park. And I know we have spoke a little bit about that. Amanda, did you have any additional comment on the recycling?
Yeah, certainly. That's definitely a comment we heard through the pilot, and something we need to consider going forward. The city itself doesn't actually have in-house recycling collecting the same way we have garbage collection services. We don't have recycling collection for our facilities. Historically, the approach has been to put the can receptacles that hold, a handful of cans for people to pick and take home, or take to the bottle depot with them. But we understand from the public feedback we've heard to date that we'll need to look at another solution. So whether that's partnering with a not-for-profit or something like that. So we would investigate and try and find a solution to our lack of in-house recycling if we were to recommend a permanent program, because we did hear that loud and clear from what we've received in feedback to date.
Great. Thank you, Amanda. I'm just looking to see if I have any other questions. Again, there are certainly comments on the alcohol in the parks, and these are great. We certainly, I don't want to diminish them. We have recorded them, and we are taking note of them, because they certainly will all contribute to assist with that issue as well too. Again, there is another comment about the beavers, so I am going to read that one out as well too. I would love to read an article in the Gazette that explains how beavers are good for the river. They take down large, healthy trees all summer long because it's impossible to put wire around every tree. They build dams in several places, and Public Works has to continually remove these mountains of branches. Melissa, do you have any comments on that one?
Sure do. There actually was an article in the Gazette this summer. With the water being so low in the river, there was a number of dams along the river. And without those dams, our fish populations would have greatly suffered due to high water temperatures and low dissolved oxygen levels. So we left those dams in place intentionally to help protect our fish populations in the river. It is the beaver's nature to build dams to heighten the water level when it's too low. And that has benefits to not only the riparian vegetation, but the fish populations, water birds, aquatic insects, invertebrates, you name it. So they are what's known as a keystone species, and when you take them out of the ecosystem, it can be a catastrophic thing, actually. So that is why we work with the beavers and try to keep a healthy population within the city. So that article, trying to remember when it came out. It did come out in, I believe it was July of this year. But we can certainly look into putting out more communications about beavers. I'm more than happy to talk about beavers whenever you want.
Thanks, Melissa. I think everybody is fascinated with beavers. I know every time we're walking along there, look to see what activity is going on. So that's great. Another question that we have for park encroachment for backyard extensions, will it be addressed by complaint and followed up with a warning with education? How will those be managed? Amanda, yes.
Thank you. And that's a great question, Dawn. So with the new council policy approved in 2021, I believe it was May, there's a process that the city will go through. We do receive notice of encroachments in a variety of ways. Our staff are constantly out in park spaces and have a pretty good idea of what those park spaces should look like. So they notice them. We do have, when people try and sell properties, that often comes up where, the real property report isn't quite aligning with where that fence actually is. So we find out in a variety of ways, and the first approach is always to work with the landowner through education, through opportunities to remove or remediate, and working with that landowner to provide some different solutions. The one change that hasn't really been super clear in the past is that encroachment on certain types of certain types of public spaces, like public utility lots, are sometimes permitted and are expressly permitted through this council policy. But encroachments into particularly environmental reserve and municipal reserve, which are the two primary parks, what people commonly call parks in St. Albert, are completely prohibited. So we would work with the landowner not to remove the encroachment, because those spaces are either protected for an environmental reason, not a private reason, or protected for the public use, not private use. So the council policy and the bylaw just make it clear that we won't allow encroachments, we won't enter into encroachment agreements. It would have to be a removal of the encroachments, but it wouldn't be a notice and you'd have to clean it up the next day. Some of these processes, because of the retaining walls and things like that, can take years. And as long as the landowner continues to work with us, the bylaw wouldn't be used as an enforcement tool. It's just really for those landowners that don't want to deal with the encroachment and just refuse to release that space back to the public realm that we'd be looking at using that tool.
Excellent. Thanks, Amanda. I don't have any more questions listed at this point. Is there anyone else that did have a question? If you wanted to use the raise the hand function or type your question in, we'll maybe just give it a few more seconds if there was anyone. Dawn, now we've got to unmute you. Melissa, you're muted.
I'm trying to unmute Dawn.
There we go.
There we go.
Hi, Dawn.
I was
Go
just
ahead.
clapping my hands to say thank you. I was not ready.
You were okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dawn. Was there anybody else with any questions? It sounds like we've covered a bit. Certainly lots of concerns regards the alcohol in the parks. We have heard, that before, but certainly all great information for us to collect. Amanda has put up on the PowerPoint the further information for further public engagement opportunities. See the conversation.stainalbert.ca/parks-bylaw, and that's from that Cultivate the Conversation page on the website. Well, that's all the time we have for this evening. I do want to thank everyone for your participation, your thoughts, and especially your passion in regards to our parks and to activities and behavior in the parks. We will be posting the recording of tonight's presentation on the Cultivate the Conversation page. And as well, we will be providing a summary of what we heard. The summary and the video should be up within the next week or so. Thank you again. Have a great rest of your evening. And we'll see you all again. Thank you so much. And thank you, Manda, for your great presentation. You can just answer those questions. Such a knowledgeable person. We're lucky to have Manda working for the city of St. Albert. Anyway, thank you all and have a good night.
Thank
Thanks,
you, everyone.
everyone.